There's a question from Jagannath of St. Stephen's. Yeah. You have the mic? Yeah, in front of you.
Hello, sir.
Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. Taking a cue from you saying that the Indian rupee is appreciated with the yen or the pound itself or the euro, we have a situation where there's some sort of competitive QE taking place with the Japanese bank standing where it is, ECB probably going in next year, and obviously US stopping it. Are we looking at a neo-currency war where we have the more advanced economies trying to compete against each other? Two-part question is, one, is that a possibility? And two, in that case, will we as an emerging economy look at something like quantitative external easing that you spoke about in Brookings? Will we start operating in the exchange market and say, let's say, stabilize the rupee in that sense so that we're still competitive in the international market?
It's a very good question. I think that the industrial countries, one way the very accommodative policies work, in fact, the primary way may be by weakening the currency rather than by necessarily, making interest-sensitive sectors of the economy respond with higher investment and higher purchases. The demand side effects aren't happening as much as the effects on the exchange rate and the effects to some extent on asset prices. People feel wealthier because prices are higher and then go out and spend more. There's a little bit of that, but the exchange rate effect, to my mind, is one of the bigger effects. How do we respond? Well, what happens as a result of all this is we have ton loads of money coming our way, and we have to be responsible in using that money, which means that we shouldn't use it if we can't use it properly, which is where keeping a tighter fiscal deficit so that we don't overspend based on borrowed money is important. I think we are a country which is capital short. So if we can use that money more effectively over time, especially longer term money, we should do it. So we are trying to encourage FDI, so it comes in responsible and longer term ways. We're trying to discourage very short term debt money, and we've put in place constraints on that. I don't think it's feasible for us to maintain a exchange rate over the long run that is not consistent with the broad forces in the market. So, for China, what it did over time, people kept complaining the renminbi was undervalued, involved a tremendous amount of financial repression domestically, keeping interest rates really low, even while for depositors, while buying tremendous amounts of dollars. We can't do that. We can't keep interest rates at a level that we want, given where the financial system is. As I've said, we've accumulated reserves, but I don't think our objective is to accumulate $3 trillion worth of reserves.
China's 3 trillion, yeah.
3 trillion right. Plus.
Just before I open it up to a free-for-all, just to clarify on your excellent speech, which is of course hit the headlines, about not only make in India, make for India. Because the growth rate, we reached what's called a new mediocre.
Mediocre.
The new mediocre, the global, at least the West is going to go through a very much slower rate of growth. That's the new mediocre. So don't rely on them. But doesn't the size of the countries matter, the size of those markets? You add 5% in the American GDP and sliding like another India. And while India may grow at 9%, 8%, 10%, it's still a small economy. So did you mean, and I just want to clarify, create the conditions and let an entrepreneur decide whether he makes for India or makes for international? Or did you mean only make for India?
No, so it was make in India largely for India. Largely was the word. So first, it wasn't against make in India. Yeah. Let's create the conditions to make in India, whether it's manufacturing. This was not a speech against manufacturing. It was let's focus on...
Not a speech against e-commerce.
Not a speech against e-commerce. Not a speech against services. Let us create the conditions, might be in this room, decide where they want to go. And we've seen when our computer industry, our software industry, decided to go in a direction, it produced miracles.
Right.
And let somebody else decide. They made.
But the software did make for international, right?
They made for international. So
yeah, because the size of the market.
The second part of the speech is not saying be pessimistic about exports. In fact, there's a word in there, I'm not an export pessimist. I think where we can find a comparative advantage, we do magnificently, whether it's in business process outsourcing or whether it's in pharmaceuticals, we will find our niche. Essentially, it's a speech against industrial policy of the worst kind. There are some industrial policies which are reasonable, but the kind that, to my mind, is now not possible, which is undervalued exchange rate, export champions. These are the guys who will get benefits. These are the guys who will take us forward. If we do that, we run the mistake of believing the world was as it was when those guys moved forward, and that the world will be as hospitable as it was when those guys grew. And I'm saying, no, because the rest of the world is growing slowly, let's be a little careful. But by all means, it wasn't against exports. If you can export, great. If you can manufacture in India, great.
Yeah, but I do remember interviewing Lee Kuan Yew once and said India missed the boat. When we got there, the highway was empty. Now the highway is packed. So you have to change and take that into account, I guess.
Absolutely. And figure out how you build a separate highway.
Yeah.
And what that separate highway is. And my sense is there's a lot the government needs to do, a lot it's embarked on. This new, reducing the amount of business regulation and entrepreneurs to face, tremendous idea. Financial inclusion, tremendous. Let's do all these things and then see what happens. And our people, we have plenty of entrepreneurs, they'll create magic.
Now the lazy ones who didn't put in their questions are now coming in. The young lady in the middle there, in the middle of the fourth row in orange. Yeah.
Hello, sir. With the new government coming in and a lot of promises made for India's economic development, the recent mid-year economic review, spoils all that. It does not give very good results. I mean, in spite of October being the festival month, the industrial output, especially of consumer goods, has been shown to be very low. The trade deficit has widened. There is a dip in the private investment. So how do you propose to plan for the remaining part of the year so that the overall financial report is answerable to the promises which were made?
Well, first, I think 6 months is short in the life of any country. It takes a long time to get things, back fully on track. That said, I mean, be a little careful about putting too much weight on the October production numbers. October had many holidays. I don't know how many of you sort of spend most of October worrying, when are we going to work?
Nobody worried about that. Yeah. Only you.
Well,
but it's year on year, so same thing in last October.
No, but this October had more holidays than the previous October.
But so 1%, isn't it dismal? It's really
some of
worrying.
that will get cleared up. Also, our statistics. I mean, you must have heard this from many economists. Our statistics leave much to be desired. I think our statisticians fully aware of it, trying to fix it, but there are issues.
No, I
there.
also heard that the tax regime and this, like for example, on Nokia, they had to shut down a factory which 55,000 workers had to go because of some retrospective tax. And that has affected, in fact, even the industrial...
Well, also because that is the factory we look at to assess the production of that particular sector.
Oh, I see.
When in fact there are other industrial factories, but they haven't been included. Those are issues with the statistics.
That's a wrong statistic.
Those are issues. Yeah. But all in all, I would agree that we are not sort of in a phase of strong growth as yet. My hope is, as many of the factors which are under play come together, including some of the work the government is doing, we will see pick up. Now remember, I mean, we have had previous periods when governments have done a bunch of reforms and growth has taken time to pick up. You've kept saying, where is the growth? Where's the growth? We're reforming, no growth. It's not instantaneous. There are delays between when, even monetary policy. Monetary policy has, in the famous words of somebody, I don't remember who, but long and variable lags. Cut interest rates today, the effects show up 3-4 quarters down the line. In India, typically 3 quarters.
So when you cut them in the next, then it'll show up 3 quarters later.
If you say so, yeah.
Young man, yes. Can't get a headline on interest rates, quite rightly actually.
I'm Nilesh Basuroy and I work as a researcher with eCareer and I graduated from SRC this year. So I have a broad question for you about the inherent structure of capitalism. There are a lot of questions recently which have been arising about like Thomas Piketty's book talked about the concentration of wealth in a few hands and how the subsequent inequity that follows. And very recently a book by Naomi Klein said that, a book called This Has Changed Everything, said that the profit-driven characteristic of capitalism will not allow us to protect the environment. So I would want to know, since capitalism is the most dominant form that prevails, how do you feel capitalism can evolve and address these concerns?
See, the word capitalism has bad connotation. I like to think of free enterprise. That is where everybody has opportunity, right? The concerns, I think, that have emerged over recent years is that a large fraction of the population doesn't have the capabilities to take advantage of the opportunities generated by a free enterprise system. They don't have the right education, they don't have the right health, the nutrition, etc. And in India, how many people are malnutritioned? And that has a tremendous adverse effect on your IQ and your ability to go forward in a vibrant economy. So I think we have to work on two fronts. That we have to make it possible for people to have much greater capabilities while preserving or expanding the opportunities that free enterprise gives. So at the same time as we work on expanding access to financial services, on broadening inclusion and so on, that's giving you access to capitalism. We also have to make sure when you get there, you have the ability to actually run a small enterprise, do something. So both those are extremely important. Now, some people say because it hasn't worked as advertised, let's shut down the free enterprise system. Well, we know how the alternatives worked. And, if it involves Naomi Klein pricking out who gets the goodies, I'd rather be in this world.
Two more questions, I think. Yeah, one here, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Ishrita from LSR. Sir, one of the major sectors we need to focus is also financial inclusion. So we've seen how M-Pesa has worked very well in one of the African countries, Kenya. So how well do you think can a concept like M-Pesa work in India, and what is its scope?
So we are trying to actually bring about not one M-Pesa but many M-Pesas.
You'll have to explain that for the
M-Pesa is an electronic money. Actually, it's not electronic money. It's a way of transferring money from one phone to another, one phone account to another very fast, and then building on that variety of financial services, including the Kenyan Central Bank governor tells me today, loans. So a lot can be built on that structure. Now, we have the possibility of doing that. In fact, we have M-Pesa. It's a Vodafone trademark in India today. But partly because the cell phone companies have not cooperated as well as we would have liked with the banks, and I don't know where the difficulties are, and I don't want to ascribe blame, it hasn't taken off to the extent that it has taken off there. Today, however, we're seeing the advent of more cooperation between the banks and the cell phone companies, but we are also in the process of licensing new entities called payment banks, which can basically do that kind of stuff by themselves and don't need alliances. And some banks are interested in opening payment banks, some cell phone companies are interested in opening payment banks. When that happens, over time, I think we will get to a situation in the next few years, I'm talking 2, 3, where your cell phone is your account. And it's not just for people with smartphones, but people with ordinary phones and across the spectrum of people in the country. So I think we're on the verge of a revolution in the combination of telecom and banking. And I think these payment banks will play a part, as will the regular banks and telecom companies.
That's wonderful to hear, and the RBI will encourage this.
Well, we're waiting for people to apply for licenses, and there are a variety of people who've shown interest, and we hope to license them quickly, as well as create an environment where they can expand as fast as possible.
Excellent. One last question here.
Thank you, sir. My name is Arjun. Sir, over the last very arduous election year, the public sphere has been transformed more towards big business, FDI in the big sectors, the manufacturing, the infrastructure. Don't you think that for any free economy, as you and I envision, the focus of the public has to be towards entrepreneurship? That the focus has to be towards small localized businesses rather than this big business bailout kind of a thing that we have seen over the past few years?
Well, I agree that we have to create the environment for all businesses. And the best businesses are the businesses that start small and grow big, that don't stay small. Because as they grow big, they employ more people, they create more job opportunities, and they can do more things more cost effectively. So absolutely with you when we say we have to create the environment for entrepreneurship, which means business regulation, finance, but also getting a cadre of people you can hire when you open your business, people with the appropriate skills. So to that extent, I see no difference between working on all these areas more broadly for the existing businesses, for the small, for the big, as it is for working for entrepreneurship. I think it's the same thing, that we have to create a business environment that allows people to start up and grow. I don't think there's something specific to small guys who haven't started as yet. I think so long as we create that environment, we will see the effects.
But carrying on from that infrastructure, you need to boost the growth rate, which the RBI really can't do. But you have a problem where many of the big businesses that are required for infrastructure are heavily leveraged, have got high debt, and can't really invest now. And maybe you wouldn't even like to see them invest. In that kind of scenario, it's tempting for people to ask the government, okay, for 1 year throw fiscal caution to the wind and invest in infrastructure. Is that dangerous?
Well, I think there are some areas where the government can direct flows. Railways, for example, we need massive investments in railways, and we know where they need to be done.
Right.
So there, if the government draws in money in some ways, that's not a bad thing. Does the government have to build every railway line out or every? Not necessarily. It can, there are very many effective examples of alternatives in this country. But I think it would be a mistake in general for the government to take over the entire business of infrastructure at this point because they are heavily indebted.
Because the private sector is indebted.
Because the private sector is indebted. Instead, it may be better to try and work down the debts of the private sector, coax entities to sell what they have to sell, and, at the margin, maybe the government could take up some projects, but I don't think entering in a big way by itself, it left that area many years back for good reason. To re-enter and forget the lessons of the past may not be the wisest thing. But there is scope for taking reducing the debt load, getting these firms to bring in new equity, getting them to sell off some assets which are functioning. Right. All those things need to be done.
Work together, get rid of their debt and get them to invest in infrastructure rather than the government.
Because they build expertise.
Yes.
Some of them are building airports across the world.
Yeah.
Why can't they build more airports here, and can we get them
railway stations.
Or railway stations, absolutely.
So 1 year from now, India's growth rate over 7% or under 7%?
I'd be happy if it's in the middle sixes at that point. Middle sixes.
And inflation, you'd be happy if it's minus 20%.
No,
5%. You've got a 4 to 6% target. Yeah. But middle sixes next year and year after?
I would hope that we certainly touch 7. Beyond 7, I think depends on how much we do in terms of serious sort of restructuring the framework of the country. And I think things are underway. Let's see how they play out.
Round of applause. Wasn't that amazing? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.